YouTube. I want to say hello to all the new subscribers that have come on since I've done my last video, and I want to say thank you for all the feedback that I've gotten on the Walstad videos. And I am happy to say that this is now officially the third in the series of the Walstad videos on explaining the Walstad method from my perspective. This is another video on plants, part 3, and we're going to talk about allelopathy. And if you haven't heard of allelopathy, or maybe you've heard people call it Allelopathy, I've heard a bunch of different pronunciations. Allelopathy, I believe, is one of the correct ways to say it, so I'll stick with that. But basically, allelopathy refers to the beneficial or harmful effects of one plant on another plant through the release of chemicals or chemical compounds. So what that means is that, if you're not aware of this, plants will release chemical compounds in a variety of different ways to either benefit their own kind or to defend themselves against a variety of different things: insects, fish, in this case, predators. Think about an onion, right? An onion is probably the best example I can think of as allelopathy in action, right? You hold an onion in your hand, it's no big deal. You cut into an onion and you're crying, right? That's because you've released chemicals, you've broken down the cell walls and created an acid that's irritating your eyes, right? Well, plants, they did that on purpose, right? The plant does not want you eating the root, therefore it's going to make you cry, make you taste bad, etc. Well, aquatic plants are no different, okay? It's a major investment on the part of the plant, if you think about it. Aside from photosynthesis going on, it's actually producing these chemicals, it's building these compounds, it's storing them in its cellular structure, and it's actually actively releasing them or metering or dosing the release of these chemicals into the water through its roots, through its leaves, through a variety of different ways in order to defend itself and in order to help itself succeed in its environment, right? So it's a major investment, all right, in a chemical defense, and it's meant to be released against other organisms for the most part, okay? So typically, plants do produce more than one type of chemical, okay, in an effort to resist a variety of different things, right? We've got eaten by animals, insects, disease, or even to kill off competing plants in an environment, okay? It can be a subtle thing like inhibiting young plants of another species or even of the same species from maturing, basically creating a slow die-off, or it could be more aggressive and could actually be poisoning the ground through its root structure so that no other plants could survive in the immediate area. A lot of different amazing things that plants do. So if you look back on some of my older videos, I used to have a lot of duckweed, okay? And duckweed's a great plant for a new tank. It's a fast-growing plant with a lot of nutrient uptake. It's got aerial advantage for CO2, for photosynthesis, because it floats on top of the water. And with a decent amount of light, your biggest problem is scooping it out on a weekly basis like I used to, and sort of throwing all the extra away or sharing it with other people who don't have duckweed. And I did that for a long time. Then, when I set up my 47 column, I noticed that when I added duckweed, which I wanted in that tank initially, it would just die. At first I thought the lights on the tank might be too bright, because I put brighter lights on there because it's such a deep tank, and of course it's close to the window to get sunlight. But that wasn't the case. I mean, I'd add scoops and scoops of duckweed from my 55, and it would wither and disappear in a few weeks in the 47. So one tank produced more than I needed, and the other was a lost cause for duckweed. I honestly had no idea why at the time. Then one day I was reading Walstad's book, preparing for one of my other videos, and I was going through the allelopathy section, and I noticed something that made perfect sense, and I really couldn't believe it. So it turns out my new tank had one different plant that was the answer, or that I thought was the answer, and that was the Vallisneria americana, or Val, right, as we like to call it, jungle Val, some people call it, which in there was documented studies that had shown that it inhibits the growth of duckweed. Who knew? I had no idea. Now, it clicked, but I was really curious and I had to make sure, and I knew just the way to find out, because at the time I was getting really tired of having duckweed in my 55. It's, you know, it's matured enough that the plants are growing really well. I added some other fast growers in there. I've since swapped out for other fast growers, but I really wanted to get rid of the duckweed. It was blocking the light and driving me nuts. So what I decided to do was is put some Val in the 55 and see what happened. And lo and behold, what was actually going on was I slowly saw over the course of a couple of weeks the elimination of duckweed in my tank. Now, for those of you who have duckweed, you know it's hard as hell to get rid of with good conditions. One tiny little plant left, and you know within a week or two, the top of your water is covered again in duckweed. So I was like, the Val's working. I was amazed, right? It just slowly diminished to nothing. And then I finally realized two things. One, that's exactly what the problem was with my 47, was the Val was killing off the duckweed. And number two, I just was able to leverage my knowledge on allelopathic behavior to actually eliminate a plant that I didn't want anymore in a clean and efficient way without me beating my head against the wall. So, great little story. To me, perfect example of learning about allelopathy and then maybe even making it work to your advantage. But there's a couple of areas of allelopathy that I want to discuss. Plants have a lot of different natural enemies that they're working against with allelopathic chemicals. So let's talk about a couple of them, right? Plants versus algae, right? Round one. Okay. So it's not surprising that, knowing that plants have allelopathic chemicals in them. See, I like to say allelopathic too, so trying to be consistent. So it's not surprising, right, that plants would probably have allelopathic chemicals directed at algae or to inhibit algae. For us, that's probably an added bonus in the aquarium world, along with understanding that plants, as a Walstad concept, should be out competing algae for nutrients, light, etc., and keeping them from growing in the tank or taking over the tank. Turns out there's also chemicals coming out of plants typically that help with that as well. You're probably not going to see a single solitary plant that's going to eliminate all your algae problems. That's not what this is about. It's about a variety and a number of different things that build in a Walstad environment to culminate in a near algae-free, plant-rich environment, right? So every little bit helps, right? And understanding that this is sort of a world of chemical warfare exists can work to your benefit, like we saw, or like I talked about with the duckweed. Of course, algae are plants, right? We can't forget that. So they have chemicals helping them to survive as well, right? Some against other algae species, some against herbivorous insects and animals, right? If you've ever heard of large algae growths or die-offs affecting fish, right? Red tides in the oceans, things like that, even in fresh water, it's typically allelopathic chemical reactions from the algae. So it's worth noting, right? Can't forget that algae is a plant too. Round two, plants versus bacteria and invertebrates, right? Studies of allelopathic chemicals from plants have also shown to inhibit certain species of bacteria. I think bacteria come in two different, sorry, I'm not an expert on it. I think there's like gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria, different types of bacteria. But from what I remember, in Diana Walstad's book, she talks about them inhibiting can inhibit both types of bacteria. And in her book, she also mentioned specifically, actually, there was a water lily, just to give you an idea, Nymphaea tuberosa that actually showed an extremely high antimicrobial activity. So if you think about bacteria-based infections that maybe fish could get, or that obviously that plants or can be exposed to, there could be plants out there that could help inhibit certain areas of bacterial activity that we don't want. Definitely definitely an interesting read and a research topic. But interestingly enough, on the invertebrate side, a pretty common plant that most of us have, Allodia, actually was shown to inhibit populations of mosquito larvae, mosquitoes in general, midges and daphnia. So interestingly enough, if you've got mosquito problems in your tank, plant some Allodia, and you probably won't have that problem much anymore, or it'll at least diminish it a little bit. So, but really the part that we want to focus on is allelopathy in the aquarium. So if you're running a planted aquarium and you're watching this video, you have allelopathic chemicals being released by your plants. Congratulations. You did it. You didn't have to do anything about it. You just put the plants in. They're doing it on their own. But maybe you've got that one plant that just won't grow, right? Or keeps dying. No matter how ideal the light shines on it, what area you put it, what spotlight you put it in, whatever the case may be, it just won't grow, right? Chances are it's a allelopathic issue, and it's probably something that you don't necessarily want to do anything about or can't do anything about. You may not ever be able to technically prove it. Sometimes it's a gut reaction, but that's likely what it is. And if you guys remember, I had some Java fern in there a while back. I just recently took it out. It had the exact same problems. I'm convinced it was a allelopathic reaction. Somebody, and I apologize for not remembering your screen name, but somebody had come up with a really good theory that it was because of a lack of a certain set of nutrients in the water for Java fern. That might be because he thought it was the only plant that I had that was not planted in the dirt. But it turns out, obviously, I've got my Anubias here, and that's not planted in dirt, and that stuff's thriving. So, I mean, typically I'm gonna guess that one of the other plants in here releases something that inhibits Java fern specifically. But let's talk a little bit about the specifics around allelopathic chemicals in an aquarium scenario, because that's obviously what we're here to talk about. So think about a typical high-tech aquarium, right? Doing regular water changes will typically dilute these chemicals and make these chemicals less effective, or maybe even eliminate their reactions altogether, right? So you might see plants coexisting that normally might not do so well in a Walstad tank. Reason why? Well, in both high-tech and Walstad tanks, allelopathic chemicals are in a closed environment, and they don't dissipate because the volume of water is not that large and it doesn't get changed that often, right? High-tech tanks will dissipate the water through changes, right? Through water changes. So we might not see the same level of reaction, right? Okay, you changing the water out, things are gonna get diluted. But Walstad tanks, if you think about it, we do minimal water changes. I do minimal water changes. I haven't changed the water in months in this tank. I just top off for evaporation. So the chemicals in my tank are actually building, right? And this is obviously often going to heighten their effectiveness. That duckweed in your buddy's CO2 injected weekly 20% water change tank might get along great with his Val, but we know what happened from the story I just told you about mine, and the studies that backed up my assumption proved me right. So, in the end, awareness is king, right? And sometimes we get answers to our questions, unfortunately, too late for the fish or the plant at the immediate time. But as we get new information, we can use it and we can move on with it. I hope you guys are going to benefit from these facts and ideas around allelopathic reactions and chemicals in plants, the warfare that goes on, and add them to your arsenal of knowledge, right, that we all need, and end up a better aquarist for it. I know I'm getting better at it too. I'm really digging into this stuff and enjoying it. And as always, I highly recommend that you get and read Diana Walstad's book if you're interested in a more in-depth education on the topic. I'm just talking about it from my experience, trying to educate you guys as best as possible, share some knowledge. If you found it to be a real eye-opener, I know I did, and I sort of found my brain going, aha, wow, I had no idea. And now I look at things in a different light because of it. So hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you guys are looking forward to the next video. I promise to get it out sooner than the last. Thank you, YouTube. Enjoy.